What does it look like for us to live with unshakable joy and purpose, even when our life falls apart? That's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, this is Jill from the North Woods, talking about the Bible, one small chapter at a time. We are talking about now the book of Philippians. These books are going to go pretty quickly because most of these other letters are very short and go by very quickly. So we're going to have a lot of companion videos explaining who the people were. So for every time we start a new book or a new author, then we're going to have a video on Small Steps with God playlist that will explain who these people were, what they did, what their lives were like, and why was this person writing them a letter. So we start out with our opening letter of Philippians, talking about this glimpse into the heart of the Apostle Paul. He's laying his heart out right now, and he's right now in prison in Rome. He doesn't know what his future is like. Is he going to die? Is he going to get let go? Is he, what's going to happen next? And Roman prisons, not great. Terrible places to be. He was probably also chained up. Again, this is somewhere probably around 60 to 62 AD. So we're looking at 29 years after Christ was put to the cross. So he writes to the believers of Philippi, again, this is in Macedonia, that talks about joy, radiating joy and confidence, that he's not weighed down by being scared that he's going to be put to death, or bitterness, like I've done nothing but serve Christ, and here I am. There's a lot of different takes he could have had in here, but instead he overflows in this chapter with gratitude, love, and unwavering focus on the gospel. He is not budging his motives at all. And this letter basically helps us to see what we can do to respond to hardship, what true partnership with other people in faith looks like. And when our hope, when our future looks bleak, what is our hope really going to look like? And so I think this chapter is really challenging to readers like us too, who think differently about purpose, and we'd maybe experience suffering in a different way, and spiritual maturity. These are things that are still challenges to us today, even though our lives are very different than what they were at this time. And with his other letters, Paul begins Philippians by identifying himself and Timothy as authors, and then addressing the recipients, this time the saints in Philippi, including their overseers like leaders, let's say that way, bishops. Bishops is a great term, and deacons. And we're not exactly sure what deacons did, but we know that there were deacons and deaconesses. And the standard Paul greeting, grace and peace. What distinguishes the Philippians letter is really how open he is in this. We've seen other letters that he's written that were either very theological or a little bit angry in rebuking the church that was struggling with something, coaching people who were immature, or mentoring people and trying to tell them how to correct their ways. But what Paul is writing here is such a loving and warm letter, and this is a community that has stood by him faithfully in many different ways and many different times. Tradition, like I said, places this during Nero's reign, and while Paul was under house arrest, if you remember, Nero was the one that they always said, fiddled while Rome burned. Chances are it was a lyre or some other instrument, but what the Roman burning is either Nero had the burning set, or somehow the fires started and Nero let it happen because he wanted to, first of all, scapegoat this young church as they did this. The Jews and the Christians, they did this to us. But there was also rumors that he wanted to do other things with land inside of Rome, and the best way to get people out is to burn their houses down. So he mentions that he is house arrest in Rome. He mentions the Praetorian Guard that supports, this setting. So he sort of, like I said, no. We know that Nero was known for his cruelty and scapegoating Christians, and the destruction of Jerusalem has not yet occurred. So if we're sitting somewhere, like 60 to 62, this is going to happen in like 8 years. And so Nero is setting the stage for all of this to happen. And Philippi was named for Philip of Macedonia. That's going to be Alexander the Great's father, who rebuilt the city in 357 BC. And this was a part of Roman district. It wasn't growing as rapidly as port cities might grow, but still it had a big Roman road and a lot of traffic going through it, trade, everything else. It got more famous in this Battle of Philippi, where Octavian, later Augustus Caesar, and Mark Antony defeated Brutus and Cassius, the assassins of Julius Caesar. So it's a very historic place. And veterans were settling in this area, bringing in more money and more status to kind of what used to be a sleepy town on a Roman road. As a Roman colony, it had privileges like tax exemption, and it had, the Romans would have felt very at home there, some cultural familiarity with it. When Paul visited Philippi and during his second missionary journey, he was receiving gifts from the church, possibly from the congregation itself. Lydia was a wealthy woman who lived there, sold purple goods, and she was one of the very first converts there, along with her household. And this is going to be a very deep connection between Paul and the Philippian believers, along with Lydia as part of it too. And when we've seen other, letters coming from Paul, sometimes it's theological, like I said, sometimes it's rebuking, but this is a very deep spiritual maturity letter. And so that you can tell that is because it's a very late letter, that this church has had years now to grow and sort of find its feet under it. And Paul feels very free to speak to them very deeply and lovingly to them. They're very solid in their faith. So when Paul greets the bishops and the deacons, the leaders and the servants in the church, he uses the term saints, not in the idea of how the Catholic Church canonizes people, but individual believers in Christ, grace and peace, which will mirror terms like shalom. He's a Jewish guy that mirrors that idea. When you say shalom, you are saying peace, you are saying hello or goodbye. It's a way to wish everyone well-being in their lives. And he expresses that their joy and partnership in the gospel is from the first day until now. It's not interrupted. And it's more of a shared belief, too. This idea is a concept called koinonia, and you've probably heard that term in the Christian church or heard it from Christians if you aren't a Christian. They talk about koinonia fellowship. It's deep, mutual, supporting generosity, and a shared mission. It's a very deep term, and that is what he's having with these Philippians. Paul talks about his imprisonment that has served to advance the gospel. That while he's being chained up, that's not silencing him. Even the Praetorian guards heard the message of Christ. Others, inspired by his example, are now preaching more boldly because of it. And all these motives are pure from Paul. But he says that some others preach out of envy or rivalry or see Paul's imprisonment as discredit. Look at that shabby guy. If God really loved him, he wouldn't be sitting in a Roman jail. Look at me, I'm better, right? Comparing ministries, saying I'm successful, I'm living a very rich life, and Paul's not. And this kind of competitive, spirit certainly lives in the church today. And we see churches that fixate on prestige, on making money, and sometimes, even called the health and wealth gospels. But Paul brushes this aside and says that as long as Christ is preached, he rejoices. He has joy because Christ is being preached, and that's the end of it. And so he also noticed that some of these other rivals may have hoped to add to his affliction in chains, mocking him, mocking his situation, mocking his limitations. You can't go outside, you can't go talk to people, or you can't do this or that. Paul doesn't care. He knows this is not a competition. He has one goal, and that is to make Christ proclaimed everywhere he can. Paul then turns, back towards himself and says, for me to live in Christ and to die is gain. His desire is not despair. He either way, I win. I'm set free, I win. I die in prison, I win. It doesn't even matter. And this is really a very deep meaning to it. It gives him a very deep purpose in his life. When he lives, he labors for Christ. And when he dies, he gets the reward of being with Christ. Either way, he is truly torn because he wants both to be with Jesus, but also to continue supporting the Philippians in their spiritual growth. So either way, it's good for him. And he then concludes that he will likely remain confident that his ministry will continue and that they will be led to increase their joy and their faith. But he also urges the Philippians to live lives worthy of the gospel. And whether he gets to visit them or not, he wants to hear, probably from his messengers, that they are standing firm in one spirit, striving side by side. We find out later there were some disputes going on into the church, personal disputes between people. But he also warns them, just like we've seen with other letters, that adversaries, external persecutors, internal false teachers, those simply trying to oppose their mission or, creating conflict inside of the church, that's happening. There's a word that's used for conflict, that's agon, and it carries this athletic imagery of a struggle, effort, resistance, like in a competition. It's not passive. You don't win the Olympics by standing there. You win the Olympics by doing something. It's an active contest for faith, with faith, taking action. So Paul encourages them not to be afraid. The opposition is a sign of the destruction of their enemies. And so he encourages them not to fear. Opposition, he says, is a sign of the destruction of their enemies, but their own salvation. It's just as like Christ suffered and had opposition, and that was victory, right? And so they're called to be exactly that kind of same way. And so this chapter really is a great reflection on personal ambition and competition inside of the church and retaining that gospel-centered identity. We see the temptation, these days to compare churches, to count followers, or to prioritize visible forms of success. Look at that beautiful church over there. Well, my church is growing while your church is not growing. Or I'm personally wealthy. God must be really a fan of me and not that other guy who's really poor. We are often led to competition, and he's reminding us we're not in a race against each other. Our call is faithfulness and not fame. And whether we live or die, struggle or succeed, it's all for Christ. And in the end, we know how this story ends. And that should give us a lot of courage and a lot of peace. What I'm going to meditate on is the words in this chapter that challenges us to think about how deeply our identity is rooted in Christ. And do we look at our success by, the way the world looks at our success, or popularity, comfort? But even from prison, he rejoices because his circumstances are all set into place because Christ is being proclaimed. He's winning. He's winning either way. And his perspective invites us, I think, to examine whether we're driven by results or by faithfulness, and what it looks like in, I think, every season of our lives. There were times when Paul was traveling and talking to people and having great successes, and there are places where Paul was shipwrecked and bitten by a snake, and there are places now like Paul's in jail. Whether it's good or bad or painful and happy, it all is an opportunity to reflect Jesus. And I think that's really the theme of all of this idea, too, of believers having partnership together in that faith, supporting each other, being generous with each other, having that koinonia of having a deep and selfless community. And it promotes, that idea that we're supposed to share this beauty together. What I'm going to pray about is the idea to live with boldness and joy in every circumstance, and to help me remember when I face hardships, to remember that this is an opportunity to proclaim Christ. And even if it feels like a moment of defeat for me, it can be a moment of joy, anchored in the gospel, and not by comfort or by recognition or by a popularity choice. And so we hope that that's true. And what I'm going to share with others is that Paul's perspective shift on this, thinking that if you're in a difficult season, be ready to find out that you're learning to see things as an opportunity. Find ways to make it an opportunity, to trust Christ more fully, to let others see Jesus in whatever is going on. And it doesn't mean like, I was going to really reflect Christ this much, but this has been a bad month. Instead of avoiding the pain, look for purpose and peace and a way to share the message of the gospel through it. I hope that invites, all of us into that kind of connection, that we can have that koinonia of faith and support each other, but also look together as adversity being something that we can overcome. All right, everyone, thanks so much. Appreciate you being here. Please leave a message in the chat channel and say hi. I had some issues with my emails for the last 2 weeks I didn't know about. That has been fixed. So if you emailed me in the last 2 weeks, I maybe didn't get it. So please email me again. And if you have anything that you want me to talk about, or there was an idea that you wondered, gosh, what's this about? Let me know. I'd be happy to do an episode on Small Steps with God about it. Or if you think I got something right, we are reading the Bible as lay people. I'm not shrugging my shoulders as it doesn't matter. I mean it to say, tell me. We can talk about it. We can have that debate. I remember a while ago, someone emailed me and said, well, you're reading this as the singular, personal you. You should do this, when it was actually a congregational you. It was a plural you in the Bible. And we had a good conversation about it. So whatever it is that you have, I'd love your ideas and to hear what's going on with you. Thanks so much. Have a great day.